Hi everyone. As you can see, I'm in a different location now. So I'm at the house working from here, so you're now in my kitchen. Today I want to review just a little bit, remembering the regions we have for the colonies. We have the New England, Mid-Atlantic, and Southern colonies. Remember, each one had different cultures, different climates, and different geographies to them. Today we're going to talk about the road to the revolution, when we'll be doing part 1 today and part 2 tomorrow. So I want you to listen carefully about how many conflicts arose between the British, the French, the Spanish, and the Native Americans after the 13 colonies were established. Okay? Listen to hear about the events that led the colonists to feel less and less like Europeans and to eventually want to fight for their freedom from Britain. So you've learned about how English colonies were established and how the colonists lived their lives. Throughout this time, the English, Spanish, and French fought each other for land in North America. They were land hungry and clashed over areas of North America they wanted for themselves. The Spanish had forced the French out of what is present-day Florida and gained control of it. The Spanish also moved into the areas of North America now known as New Mexico, Arizona, California, and Texas. The French were colonizing parts of present-day Canada and had also claimed the Mississippi River Valley for France. Whereas some of these land claims resulted in wars on European soil, other clashes were beginning to take place in North America. At the same time, more and more Europeans were coming to the English colonies and searching for new land to settle. They began to move further west, away from the coastal areas where people had first settled. Over time, the Native Americans began to realize that there would be no end to the influx or arrival of people. In 1675, war broke out in New England. It was time for the Wampanoag to take a stand. Chief Metacomb, the son of Chief Massasoit, led a war party against some English settlers. This attack turned into an all-out conflict. Eventually, the English settlers won, essentially destroying the Wampanoag tribe and taking even more of their land. As the colonies grew, English explorers continued west across the Appalachian Mountains to what is now the Ohio River Valley. However, this land was not uninhabited either. Native Americans had been living in this region for a long time, some of them having been forced to move west away from the eastern regions to escape the influx or arrival of settlers. The French also claimed a few areas of the Ohio River Valley. The French had established a good trading partnership with various native tribes in the area. They didn't want the English settlers to interfere with this business relationship. Neither the Native Americans nor the French wanted English settlers to build homes in this area. However, members of the British Parliament wrote to the French and told them that it was a well-known fact that the land belonged to Great Britain and they should go away. The French considered this, but said no. That was a bad sign. Conflict was brewing. The Native Americans, distressed by how much land they had already lost, steeled themselves for a fight, and so did the French. Yet another war broke out in 1754. This war is known as the French and Indian War. Fought in the forests of North America, this war went on for a very long time, almost 9 years in all. Colonists in North America were asked to fight for this land. Britain also sent thousands of soldiers across the Atlantic Ocean to help. Many Native Americans in the region, such as the Huron, fought with the French in this war. Others, like the Iroquois, sided with the British. 2 years later, the war over the colonial territory in North America spread to other parts of the world where France and Great Britain competed for land, such as Europe, the West Indies, and India. This phase of the war is known as the 7 Years' War in Great Britain. Eventually, after much conflict, the British captured the French-controlled city of Quebec, Canada. The capture of Quebec in 1759 was a turning point for the British, who eventually won the war. In 1763, the war was over, but it was the beginning of the end for the French fortune in North America. Although the French and British signed a peace treaty, the Native Americans did not. Organized attacks on British settlers continued under the leadership of Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe. These assaults, commonly known as Pontiac's Rebellion, actually involved a vast network of at least 13 Native American tribes which united together. The British soon realized it would be impossible to defend this land or the settlers who lived on it. As a result, the British Parliament and King George III decided that the settlers could not live on land west of the Appalachian Mountains. In 1763, King George issued a proclamation forbidding it. Fighting a war for many years is a very expensive thing to do. When it was over, the British Parliament realized they had spent a great deal of money. Britain was in financial trouble and someone had to help them out. That someone was the 13 colonies. The Prime Minister of Great Britain at the end of the French and Indian War was a man named George Grenville. Grenville was asked to come up with a plan to pay off Britain's debt. He thought long and hard about this and indeed did come up with a plan. How about taxing the colonists, he thought to himself. After all, Great Britain fought the war to defend them against the French and Native Americans. Grenville presented his plan to King George III in Parliament. Everyone in Britain agreed. It was a great plan. In 1764, the British Parliament passed the Sugar Act. This law placed a tax on foreign sugar and molasses. By making foreign sugar and molasses more expensive, the colonists were being forced to buy these goods from British producers in the West Indies. However, this act did not just include sugar, it also included wine, cloth, coffee, and silk. The colonists were now taxed if they chose to buy less expensive products from other nations. Then in 1765, British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act stated that all printed materials produced in the colonies would be taxed. Newspapers, magazines, legal documents, even cards would cost more. People were required to buy a stamp and place it on the paper item they had just purchased. In the same year, the Quartering Act was passed by the British Parliament. This meant the colonists had to provide quarters or temporary places to live for British soldiers stationed in the colonies. The colonists also had to provide supplies such as food, bedding, candles, and firewood. For many years, the colonists had handled their own affairs. Now members of a government 3,000 miles away had voted to tax them. The colonists were not allowed to vote for these British leaders, so they felt their views and thoughts were not represented in the British government. Many colonists believed that it was unfair they had to pay taxes, but did not have representation in the British Parliament. The British responded that these members of Parliament considered the interests of the entire empire, not simply the areas they represented. Although most people had accepted the Sugar Act and the Quartering Act, they were not prepared to accept the Stamp Act without a fight. Some outspoken colonists began to suggest that they should not pay it. They cried, "No taxation without representation." Talk to you tomorrow.